Soviet Union does for its allies. If we don't, we are going to lose without ever having a major war.
Some political commentators today say that now that we have recovered from the trauma, and it's taken this long, of the first war America lost, that people are going to become intensely interested in it again, and indeed there's going to be a populist revision, and people are going to look around to answer the question, just as in the 40s they asked who lost Europe, and in the 50s they asked who lost China, that an important political question in the 1980s is going to be who lost Vietnam. Do you think, and in populist terms, the answer is going to be Congress, the media, the universities, the corporate boards. Do you think that there is going to be a bitter revisionism in which people are going to look to point a finger and say who lost Vietnam, and who are they going to point the finger at?
I rather doubt it. I think there should be. I think there will be a few who will write that, and a few who will perhaps say it. But we have to understand here that as far as the intellectual leadership of this country is concerned, that in a figure of a percentage of at least 90%, they felt, one, at the end, it was a mistake to be in Vietnam in the first place. Two, that it was conducted improperly. They didn't like the bombing or anything else. And three, that we should have gotten out earlier. And in any event, four, good riddance. Now, it is true that they have a bit of a guilt complex now, somewhat a guilt complex, when they see the genocide that has been visited upon the Cambodians, and the murder and the repression that has been visited upon, of course, the South Vietnamese, as well as the Laotians. But on the other hand, even that they rationalize by blaming the Nixon administration for brutalizing the Cambodians. We were trying to prevent those who either starved to death or killed 3 million or 2 million Cambodians, whatever the case might be, and here they blame us for doing it. So it does show you that as far as the intellectual leadership of this country is concerned, that on Vietnam, I think they had a vested interest, as it turned out, in defeat there, and now they have a vested interest in seeing that history is not rewritten to report what actually happened.
Isn't it true, though, that in Cambodia, at the beginning of the American extension of the war into that neutral country, there were about 6,000 Khmer Rouge forces. As the American bombing went in and more of the country was devastated and more of the people were forced to make choices, they swelled the ranks of the Khmer Rouge so that when the communists finally took over, there were 60,000 of them, and they were able to impose this deadly, genocidal, brutal rule, so that it really was the American extension of the war which led to the swelling of the Khmer Rouge, which led to the...
No, I don't buy that. That's the Shawcross argument, and I can only say that as looking at Cambodia and what happened there, there's no question in my mind that Cambodia, just like the Viet Cong and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, they developed, of course, their own capabilities. It is true that they expanded their control over parts of the country, but the idea that we drove them back into the country, that brutalized them, that's nonsense. They were that way before we ever came in. And let us understand, too, when we talk about what the United States did as far as Cambodia is concerned, we weren't going in there to kill Khmer Rouge. We were going in there to knock out Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, who were using neutral Cambodia as a launching pad to kill Americans and our South Vietnamese allies. And my only regret, incidentally, about the so-called incursion of Cambodia is I didn't do it earlier. I wish I'd have done it earlier in January, and I should have done early in January 1969, shortly after I became president. I think it might have raised a lot of problems then, because you remember the election was pretty rough. You remember what happened to Hubert Humphrey at Chicago. He had demonstrations. I had some pretty rough demonstrations. And under the circumstances, therefore, remembering too what happened on inaugural day when the Secret Service wouldn't even let me ride in an open car down to the inaugural stand because of the demonstrators, thousands of them out there. Under the circumstances, to take that sort of action then might have been difficult. But in retrospect, had I had to do over again, knowing that the North Vietnamese had no intention whatever of honoring the conditions or agreements, whatever they were, about the bombing halt, having all those things in mind, what should have been done was to move in on their sanctuaries in Cambodia earlier and knock them out.
It seems that a most common denominator of your retrospective thought about Vietnam is that if you have one regret, it's that at every point you didn't move earlier, harder, faster. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Having in mind the fact that it would not make sense to move earlier, harder, and faster if it proved to be, shall we say, disproportionate to what you might gain. I know that you usually think of Clausewitz as being one who simply is an advocate of total war, which is not true. He was a very sophisticated observer about warfare generally. He makes the point, and other military analysts have made the same point, that force must always be used, having in mind the goal to be gained and the risks and the costs in the event you use that amount of force. That is why bombing dikes, I think, would have proved to be counterproductive throughout Asia. Using tactical nuclear weapons, the same. I think, however, insofar as bombing and mining North Vietnam is concerned, or moving into the Cambodian sanctuaries, that was a possibility in 1969, except for the fact that we were hamstrung by the bombing halt and also by the American opposition. We had to lay the foundation for it, which we did do by developing our Vietnamization program and by also developing our withdrawal. Let me say finally in that respect, an argument against the proposition I just laid down, why didn't we do it earlier, is that in those early days also, we were thinking about an initiative toward the Russians. We were thinking about an initiative toward the Chinese. I did not yet know how they might react. I don't mean that they would intervene, but I thought it was vitally important in my presidency to make a breakthrough to China and also to make some move toward negotiation rather than confrontation with the Russians. I didn't want to take action in Vietnam early in the administration, which might abort those initiatives before it started. So there are arguments the other way too.
Within a couple of months in 1975, South Vietnam ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. We have some film of those last days in Saigon. Was America humiliated in Vietnam?
The United States, in the minds of the world, yes, I think was humiliated. But let me distinguish. Not our fighting men. They didn't lose this. I think what happened there was that the United States, insofar as it's being a nation with the will and with the credibility to stand by its friends when the going got particularly difficult, that was, of course, very seriously eroded by what happened there in Vietnam. Let me say, incidentally, as I look at that, I saw them getting on those boats in the Saigon River, but I think of the boat people. Thousands and thousands, of course, as you know, tried to escape from South Vietnam by boat. And the last number I saw, at least 40,000 drowned We don't know how many starved to death in those overloaded boats and so forth and so on. But I should point out that with all the talk about Thieu's and earlier Diem's corruption and repression and so forth, that at least under them they had some freedom, they had some free press, they had some free parliaments, freely elected parliaments and so forth, they had some opposition, and now they have none. And I should also point out that there were never any boat people. All the traffic was from north to south. And I should also point out that there were reasons for these people to leave. We talk about atrocities, and we think of people being, for example, buried alive and disemboweled and so forth and so on. But one that really touched me, I mean, very deeply, I suppose, to show you the ends to which they go, the cruelty of these people. One poor devil who was a barber had been found that he had cut the hair of several American servicemen. And so they took him and chopped off his hands like that. That's what these people were going away from, and that's what they're having today.
Do you think that there are still missing American actions in Indochina?
Oh, I think so. I would be surprised if there were not. Unfortunately, I have no idea as to how possibly you can do anything about it.
I think that's our